Hello and welcome to News with a Foreign Accent. I'm Barbara Serra. The title of this newsletter, The Barriers Faced by Second Language English Journalists. I'm sick of lying to young foreign journalists who ask me for professional advice because the only honest reply is, "Can you pass as a native speaker?" Well, this article is very personal and will strike a particular chord with those who, like me, are second language English. But for all of you native speakers about to click away, don't. I'm highlighting a blind spot that anyone who cares about true diversity in media should find valuable. After all, there are more than 1 billion second language English speakers in the world, so it might help you to know what they're thinking. Well, it is strange that at a time when the issue of privilege is finally being widely discussed, be it white privilege, male privilege, class privilege, etc., one of the biggest privileges of all hardly ever gets a look in, namely the privilege of language, or more specifically, the privilege of speaking English. Now, it may sound like an odd concept if you're listening to this in a country where English is the official language, like the UK, the US, or Australia. But English is so much more than the spoken language of the Anglophone world. English is the conduit that allows our world to be as interconnected as it is. From social media to business, journalism, research, academia, the entertainment industry, and everything in between, English is the key needed to access our globalized world. Well, since English is the global language, it's not surprising that more than 1 billion people have learned it as their second or even their third language. But it's the 600 million or so native speakers who have really hit the linguistic jackpot, with added bonus points if their words come in a clear, posh but not too posh, British accent. Now, speaking English as your native language is a massive privilege that will help you cement your status in almost every field, and yet it's very rarely acknowledged as such, especially by native speakers themselves. I guess that's the whole issue with privilege. If you have it, you don't see it, and in the case of language, if you have it, you don't hear it. Well, this is where journalism comes in and my so-called lived experience, because nothing has had more of an impact on my career than my voice, or rather, my accent. I learned English at the age of 9 when I moved from my native Italy to Denmark and attended the international school in Copenhagen. I have very clear memories of not being able to speak English, of walking into that classroom and not understanding a single word that anyone was saying. That sense of otherness and alienation is seared in my memory, and I'm sure it's shaped me in more ways than I actually realize. Well, I learned English quickly, as children do, but I don't think I was a confident speaker until my mid-teens. And as my proficiency grew, I also developed that rootless mid-Atlantic accent, which might as well be called international school English, and that you're listening to now in all its glory. So now I inhabit this strange world where native speakers can tell that English is not my mother tongue, while foreigners, so to speak, think I sound like a native speaker. All I can say is that I've been working on my voice every single day since becoming a journalist, and probably before that too. What you hear now is not what I used to sound like. I work hard on clarity, diction, and intonation, although I refuse on principle to mock some faux posh accent. I am no English Rose, and I don't see why I should pretend to be one. But I have never voiced a report, presented a news bulletin, or done a live interview without being acutely aware of my English. I have dozens of little tricks that I employ before going on air to anchor my voice, and I berate myself whenever I slip up on pronunciation because I know that mistake will lose me credibility. My 20 years experience in English language media tells me that, in case you don't believe me. Now, one of my claims to so-called fame is that I was the first non-native English speaker to present a flagship news program on British terrestrial TV when I was a 5 News presenter between 2005 and then towards middle of 2006. Now, I had previously cut my teeth as a Sky News reporter, and I had done a few presenting shifts at BBC London as well. I had a wonderful time in all those networks, and I was given lots of opportunities, but my foreign accent was always an issue. I'll write about that in more detail in the future, but let's just say it was not smooth sailing, and that I realized early that diversity did not apply to what made me different. Then came the move to Al Jazeera English in 2006, and as you would expect, things were a little more relaxed on an international channel with a global audience. But if you really listen, you'll find that even on international networks, native speakers dominate. Diversity rarely extends to language and to second language English voices. So over the years, I've been contacted by many young journalists asking for advice, especially those who, like me, aren't native English speakers. If you can see it, you can be it, goes the adage, or in this case, if you can hear it. And I was often the only voice that did hear on air that sounded odd, as a colleague of mine once so eloquently put it. Well, I never really had a mentor when I was starting out, so I always tried to find the time for a chat, however brief. But ultimately, I got sick of lying to them. Because I can talk to young journalists about ambition, curiosity, and hard work. But there's one main thing I need to know. One thing that will make the biggest difference to their career. A question I have the answer to within the first 30 seconds of any conversation. And that question is, can you pass as a native speaker? Because if you can't, any kind of broadcasting career will be much harder for you, and you will probably never be considered for many high-profile presenting jobs. Well, actually, let me qualify the never in that last sentence. When I first started training as a journalist, a senior editor, who I think was trying to be kind, and actually whose honesty I sort of appreciated, told me, "You will never broadcast for the BBC." As it turns out, my TV news presenter debut was on BBC London. But then again, I was also taken off air a few months later because of my foreign accent, even though London, correct me if I'm wrong, is meant to be one of the world's most cosmopolitan cities. So I won't say never, but I'm not going to soften the blow. It's going to be an issue. Very few managers will actually say this to their foreign-sounding aspiring broadcasters because it's a minefield, it's easily offensive, potentially discriminatory, and maybe because they simply haven't really given it much thought. It's a sensitive subject. Nothing quite like the way we speak is as tied to our identities, our roots, our essence of self. So the problem is never identified and therefore it's never addressed. And if you don't believe me, well, just listen. How many second language English voices do you hear on mainstream TV or radio or podcasts for that matter? You can count them on one hand. I know that because I actually have counted them. The very, very few exceptions do not make the rule. Now, this is a big subject, and we need to differentiate between domestic and international channels, correspondents and presenters, reporters who work on domestic news as opposed to the ones that cover international stories. But the native English issue is present everywhere, and not even international channels are exempt. In fact, years ago, I was told what the formula was for international news presenters. Now, I warn you, it's deeply offensive, but also painfully accurate, and I will save it for the next newsletter. So for now, let's focus on domestic British news. The last census showed that a sixth of residents of England and Wales are foreign-born. In London, unsurprisingly, that figure rises to 40%. Now, you can be foreign-born but have moved to the UK as a child and speak flawless English anchored in a British accent. Remember the test. Can they pass as native speakers? Well, if they can, I'm sorry, to me that doesn't really count. If a culture has had enough of an impact on you to affect the way you speak, it's had enough of an impact on you to affect the way you think. And that's why this matters. Diversity isn't just about fairness. I mean, that's important too, but it's also about making the product, in this case journalism, more representative. If the UK has so many foreign-born residents and citizens, its media should reflect that and not just showcase the ones that don't stand out. Now, I wish things had changed significantly from when I started out in journalism, but the young foreign journalists I speak to tell a different story. Some are starting to speak out, like the native French UK resident Camille Dupont. Camille wrote an incisive article denouncing the lack of EU journalists in British newsrooms and highlighting that non-native speakers can also write well in English, and I linked to the article in the actual newsletter. Now, she's spot on about the lack of EU journos, and I had written about it in a previous newsletter of my own. There's 5 million Europeans in the UK, and honestly, it's like we don't exist when it comes to media representation. And Camille highlights that non-native speakers can and often do speak English to the necessary level for a career in journalism. Now, I agree with her, but there are other issues too. First of all, perfect mastery of language is obviously a non-negotiable skill in journalism. Words are our tools. Writing a powerful and concise TV script to strong images is akin to poetry. Most people can't do it in any language, and doing it in your second language is even harder. It's not impossible, but it is harder. There is no shame in admitting that. And helping non-native speakers develop their language skills should be seen as a key part of training if a network is serious about diversity. But to me, the bigger issue is what language represents, a cultural link to the audience that you're speaking to. A deep knowledge of the country you're reporting on, the customs and habits of its people, their culture, their history, their pride, and their hidden shame, their sense of self. You have to connect with your audience. When I was a reporter in British newsrooms, I used to dread the sudden celebrity deaths. It was usually some entertainer from the 80s and 90s who had shaped a generation's childhood and that I, not having grown up in the UK, had literally never heard of. People would be welling up around the newsroom, collectively reminiscing about this person's legacy, while I'd be furtively Googling his or her life on my way to the edit suite to package something suitably emotional about someone whose very existence I had previously ignored. Now, it may sound trivial, but it's not. The audience can always spot a fake, and that's what I felt like in those situations, an imposter, because it was a glaring example of the main barrier that foreign and foreign-sounding journalists will face. And here it is. If you take nothing else from this newsletter, remember this. News is about trust, and trust is tribal. If you sound foreign, you are by definition not part of the tribe. Every word you utter others you. The beauty of multiculturalism is that you can be British regardless of race, religion, or heritage. Many Britons of ethnic background rightly get offended when they're asked, "Where are you from?" But a foreign accent is the proof that someone actually is from somewhere else, that they were shaped by another culture. I've lived in the UK my whole adult life, but it would be unreasonable for me to get angry or offended when someone asked me that question, "Where are you from?" My voice is proof that I wasn't born here, and this matters when it comes to news. I'll give you an example of this. I always think that if I'd stayed at Sky News instead of moving to Al Jazeera back in 2006, I probably would have done a stint as Sky's Europe correspondent. But can you imagine if a main British TV network had had someone audibly foreign reporting on the Brexit negotiations from Brussels? Forgive the cynicism, I just don't see that happening. The us and them dynamic is real, and a portion of the audience simply would not have trusted my loyalties. And I say that as someone who's lived in the UK as a foreigner for nearly 30 years. But I would not have been seen as being one of us. My foreign-sounding last name would not have been the obstacle, because the UK is a multicultural society. But my foreign voice would have othered me with every single word. I hope I don't sound defeatist, and to all the young foreign journalists who are listening to this, please know that I hope my experiences will be to your benefit. I think things are changing and that they're changing in your favor. But the main driver of any change is realizing that there's an issue in the first place and trying to change it together. That's why I'd like to use this newsletter to share experiences of other quote-unquote foreign journalists in the UK or in any other part of the Anglophone media. Now, I'll be featuring some of these journalists here and chat to them on the podcast feature, which I'm hoping to start soon. But please do reach out to nominate anyone that you think has an interesting story to share in the comments section below, or in the Substack chat feature, which again you can find through the app. It's available not to Android, but to all Apple users, and you can just ask me direct questions there. Now, I'm going to leave you with a quote from a song that always helped me when I felt particularly alienated. Ironically, it stings an Englishman in New York, because guess what? Everyone is a foreigner somewhere. Now, I'm not going to sing it. I suggest that you find it and play it, but it's this bit. If manners maketh man, as someone said, he's the hero of the day. It takes a man to suffer ignorance and smile. Be yourself, no matter what they say. That's all for now. See you soon. Bye-bye.